So welcome to the PERSOLKELLY Workforce Insight. This webinar today is going to discuss some of the research that we published in our recent Workforce Insight reports. That was launched in March of 2022, and that research really highlighted what companies across Asia Pacific were doing with their contingent workforces. The article, once we published it, it got very good positive reception. It was picked up by a number of news sources, which just shows that this is a topic that a lot of people leaders are thinking about how to make the best use of contingent workforce resources. Just to give you a brief definition of what a contingent workforce is, because sometimes it's not clear what exactly do we mean by a contingent workforce. So a contingent workforce are employees who either on a short or fixed term contractual agreement. They are either freelancers or independent contractors, and many times companies engage with an agency in order to work with contingent workforces. So that's really what we're talking about when we discuss a contingent workforce. And today, I'm delighted to have an amazing panelist that I'll be introducing. So we have Brian Sim with PERSOLKELLY Malaysia. He's going to share some insights from the Malaysia market. We have Alvin Goh from SHRI Singapore. I'm delighted to have him with us. So SHRI Singapore is a nonprofit human resources, leadership development, and program an organization that really advances the education of human resources in the Asia Pacific market. We have Ethan Lim joining us from Galderma. Galderma is a Swiss-based company focused on skincare and cosmetics and really helping people to improve their dermatological health. And then we have Vinno Samuel joining us from Netflix. So Netflix is one of the world's leading subscription-based video as well as a production company. So delighted to have our panelists with us. They'll be sharing some insights very shortly when we get to the Q&A and interactive discussion part. But before we do that, I'm just going to briefly go over and touch on a few highlights of our Workforce Insights report on contingent workforces. So we did this research. We surveyed 12 markets across Asia Pacific. A cross-section of industries spanning from automotive, banking, financial services, fast-moving consumer goods, government, healthcare, IT, logistics, manufacturing, professional services. So we really did survey a broad cross-section of industry across 12 Asia-Pacific markets. What we found are the APAC markets that had the highest adoption of contingent workforces were Hong Kong, Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia. When we surveyed the participants and we asked them what are the benefits they're finding from engaging with contingent workforces, the four primary reasons that were identified were working with contingent workforces offers more flexibility for workforce planning. It brings in specific skills on a short-term or project basis. It fills roles without disrupting existing operations, and it allows many employers to have more time to evaluate a candidate before they make a full-time hiring decision. So those were some of the key benefits that were identified in terms of the benefit of working with contingent workforces. The sectors that we saw across those 12 markets in all of those industries, the sectors that were the most favorable in working with contingent workforces, IT and high tech, by far the leader, followed by FMCG, financial institutions, of course, healthcare and pharmaceutical, logistics, professional services, and government. And then when we think about the markets where more than 20% of the employees are contingent workers, we see the markets of Indonesia, India, Vietnam, and Thailand. Now, what's interesting is that historically, companies had engaged with contingent workforces, they almost always paid their their full-time employees better than they paid the contingent workforce. But what we're starting to see is an interesting shift that at least for some roles and some markets, contingent workers are actually rewarded more than full-time workers. And then of course, in many markets, we're seeing more of the same. So for example, in markets like Korea and China, Thailand and New Zealand, we're starting to see contingent workers in healthcare, banking, et cetera. They're actually rewarded more. In other markets, we see that the contingent workers and the full-time workers are offered the same level of reward. And those would be markets like Greater China, India, Australia, and Vietnam. Again, in industries like IT, high tech, FMCG, healthcare, and logistics. And if we think about the sourcing strategy or how companies are going out to the market and finding the contingent workforces that they need, we find that there are a variety of strategies, and markets have different mixes of how much they do. So there's a lot of internal hiring or referrals, asking your existing employees. There's engaging recruitment agencies, which is by far one of the most popular options for engaging with contingent workers. There could be outsourcing to companies. They could be recruiting directly using social media or other outreach. And in other cases, some companies are not even sure where they should go to recruit their contingent workforces. So with all that out of the way, and that's just an overview of that Workforce Insights report, I'd love to introduce Brian Sim, Managing Director of PERSOLKELLY in Malaysia, and he's going to share with us some insights from the Malaysia market. Brian, please take it away.
Thank you, Chris. A very good afternoon, everyone, and I hope all is well. I'm in fact pleased to be given the opportunity to share some of the insights of contingent workforce model, particularly in Malaysia, before I hand it over to the guest panelists later to share a wider perspective of contingent workforce model or management in Asia Pacific. Chris, we are good to go to the next slide. Thank you. Now, as all of us are aware, many companies were impacted during the pandemic, especially from the perspective of hiring plan, when most of the company were unable to plan their hiring strategy for longer term during the pandemic. Hence, many companies have started to explore on contingent workforce model. And in fact, this model has supported many companies in sustaining their businesses in terms of hiring plan short term, especially during the pandemic. This has contributed to the rise of engagement of contingent workforce, and it's aligned with the data that we are now seeing from the Workforce Insight report that we have studied, that many companies within Asia Pacific have shared with us that they intend, in fact, to increase their proportion of contingent workforce from where they are now to additional 15% more in the next 2 years to come. If you look at the data, for instance, like Malaysia, of all the companies which is already embarked and using the contingent workforce model, 44% of the company has highlighted that they will expand their contingent workforce ratio to 15% more. Same goes to the top 5 countries which the companies are adopting the contingent workforce model, like Indonesia, India, Australia. So we're pretty aligned from the client perspective that they will be expanding the contingent workforce model within their organization. Now, in this data, I just wanted to make it clear that we are not saying that contingent workforce model will be replacing the direct employees model in time to come. I believe both of whatever solutions, workforce solutions that you have within your company will continue to play an important role and contribute to the success of the company. But what we are saying is contingent workforce have become or will become one of the biggest contributor or solutions for company to come, especially in the terms that Chris has highlighted earlier, when it comes to short and fixed term employee, when it comes to engaging independent contractor to do some delivery job for your company. This, in fact, is one of the good or best model to consider or ponder upon. Next, Chris, thank you. I think we can release all the data, Chris, from there. Now, just a note that all the data in this slide and the information which I'm presenting for Malaysia-based company is based on the contingent workforce placement record that we have placed with our clients across all industries over the past 12 months. Now, these are the top industries in Malaysia who have been engaging the contingent workforce through PERSOLKELly Malaysia to serve in their organization over the past 2 months. Now, some of the differences that we have observed here in this industry over the past 2 months, particularly in the space of technology and engineering, if you look at the role type that they are hiring, right? Now, some of these roles, like for instance, security and network engineers and inspectors within the manufacturing site, were mostly hired on permanent roles only before pandemic. Yeah. But however, after pandemic or even during the pandemic, we have started to observe that more and more companies starting to designate this role under the contingent workforce model, that they started to hire contingent workforce instead of direct employees only due to the project requirement. So we foresee this model or landscape will continue to change depending on the business plan of the organization in catering to their short-term and long-term business plan. Now, it's also nice to see retail coming back into the picture. During the pandemic, retail is one of the industry that got hit big time. That a lot of them, instead of hiring, they talk about, laying off and etc. I'm glad to see a great pickup in terms of the retail industry in Malaysia, that right now they sits in one of the top industry that contributing or in fact leveraging in this contingent workforce model. Next, Chris, thank you. Okay, Chris has basically highlighted a few motivator factor or motivating factor on what is motivating the companies to continue to engage contingent workforce. I'm just going to go a bit into detail, but quick one in consideration of time. Now, from APAC perspective, this is APAC perspective. Yeah, clients are sharing with us that they find contingent workforce model offer them a lot of flexibility to workforce planning, especially in project, which is driven by timeline, and the headcounts requirement fluctuates from time to time. Now, in Malaysia, for instance, we do have clients from manufacturing or retail, for instance, they come to us this week and requested for about 40 headcounts. Next week, after they will say that, hey, from the 40 headcounts, Brian, we would like to bump up to 400 headcounts. And the week after next, after the 400 headcounts is being deployed, then client will come back to us and say, okay, client, Brian, due to the project requirement, this week we do not require that many headcounts anymore. So hence we will reduce the headcounts from 400 to 40. Yeah. So this is how the headcounts fluctuates. And again, one of the model that works best to cater to this sort of flexibility in terms of workforce planning would be contingent workforce. Yeah. Now, this model has also helped in filling up the gap in between to ensure that the company's operations are not interrupted. Now, we have also been receiving requests from clients on and off, right? When the HR approaches for a position, then they will say, hey, Brian, this is a very urgent role. Why? Because this role is left vacant for 2 to 3 months already. Why? Because we have been starting to search for the role, but because there's limitation in terms of the knowledge, in terms of the capability within our internal recruitment team. So hence we are unable to search for the roles. Hence now we are asking for your support, right? Now, in every organization, a role vacant for more than 1 day is a lose out in terms of your productivity. So hence, on this matter, I think contingent workforce will also play an important role in filling up the gap in between to ensure that your operation is not interrupted at all. Now, through the contingent workforce models, employers can also engage with different skill sets of talent to cater to either short-term assignment or project basis. Now, by engaging different skill sets of contingent workforce over time, this will also give employers a fresh and diverse perspective in trying out new approaches, which include engaging and managing the offshore talents. There are also companies who use contingent workforce model to evaluate the employees' suitability prior to converting them to become the direct employees. Now, in Malaysia, again, I'm taking an example, there are companies that come to us to engage contingent workforce for those attrition role, for those role with high attrition. Yeah. So now by engaging contingent workforce, this will also give them time to evaluate the performance and the discipline of the employee before they decide to convert them into the role of permanent in any time near future. Yeah. Thanks, Chris. Next slide. Okay. Basically, next slide. I wanted to share what's Malaysia's motivators in engaging contingent workforce, but I realized that we are pretty aligned when it comes to the feedback which has been shared by our regional clients or Asia Pacific client as well. So I'm not going to repeat again those sharing which I've updated in my previous slide. Chris, we can release all the data again. Yeah, I think the only point that I want to touch here is probably in terms of the cost efficiency side. So now I think most of the clients in Malaysia, they have shared that most of the contingent workforce who have come, whom they will be engaged or whom they have engaged before this, already come with certain skill set with them already. So hence, company do not really require to invest in terms of any upskilling or reskilling set in this group of candidate, that they can come execute the job and leave after the contract period of time. So this model will also help company to save costs from the perspective, especially in engaging the workforce for short-term project, that you do not require to engage a fixed time headcounts to cater to this kind of demand. Rather than that, you can consider to engage a contingent workforce to embark on this short-term task basis so that they can deliver the task and the end of the contract, then they will be able to depart from here and participate in another task after that. Chris, we're good for the next slide. Thank you. Now, what are some of the best practices which the employers in Malaysia have been practicing? So the first point, Chris, we can go to the first point, Chris. Thank you. Yeah, I think similar like as the direct employees, most of the organizations and workforce agencies as well in Malaysia perform the background check or reference check prior to engaging the contingent workforce. Second point. So I think, Chris, we can release all the points, then I'll just cover one by one. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, due to the capability issue, I'm at point number 2 now. Due to the capability issue, hiring process, as well as payrolling requirements, instead of allocating an internal headcounts within your organization to manage the group of contingent workforce, companies in Malaysia will consider to appoint a workforce agency like PERSOLKELLY Malaysia to support them in hiring and payrolling this category or this group of employees. In fact, this maximizes the productivity as well. Why? Because by outsourcing this task to a workforce agency, company can focus, or the relevant HR can focus on their core functions and continue to contribute and maximize on their productivity on that function itself. Point number 3, of course, as most of the contingent workforce are driven by the project timeline, it's important, of course, for the organization to develop a clear scope of work and measurement to ensure that there's this measurement component and milestone that organization can review with the contractors from time to time. Now, this will also help the employers to manage the profile of the contractors for future partnership if it's needed. But I think overall, it's important for employers to come up with a very clear, crystal clear framework, because like what we have mentioned, let it be you're engaging the workforce for short-term or long-term. There's timeline or milestone that we must be sure of, or we must be clear on how to measure them from time to time to determine whether they are successful in delivering their task or not, right? Point number 4, comp and band has always been the topic of discussion, right? Let it be in direct employee space or even contingent workforce space. Now, particularly in the contingent workforce space, especially for companies who are newly embarking on this contingent workforce model, now it's important for you to come up with the relevant and competitive comp and band scheme to ensure that you are able to attract and retain the workforce. Probably you will ask me, Brian, how, right? Now, I think it's important before you embark or even embark on this contingent workforce, like many others who are already using that contingent workforce model in their organization, I'm sure they would have done the relevant research about what's the trending ratio in the market from the perspective of comp and band. I'm sure they would also study what is the role type of comp and band. If we were to engage contingent workforce for this type of role, what is the market pay like, as well as what are other comp and band that the market are offering. Now, best, of course, is to partner with experienced workforce agency like PERSOLKELLY in this matter, which will be able to share with you on the insights of the training and the trending of the market, so that you'll be able to work hand in hand with us, or we will be able to partner you to hire the right candidate in place that will contribute to the success of the role type in the contingent workforce model. Now, point number 5, according to the Workforce Insight report as well, data has shown that company are no longer treating the contingent workforce model as secondary as compared to the direct employee. Hence, I think it's important for us to continue to foster a good relationship and partnership, in fact, with this group of contingent workforce, so that in future, if you were to re-engage them back for the same project or different project, they will not be hesitate to join your organization back. Yeah. Last but not least, point number 6, I think for company who are partnering with workforce agencies in engaging the contingent workforce, it's important for us to ensure that the vendors are aligned with your expectation when it comes to capability, when it comes to compliance, as well as having a very strong cash flow. Why do I say that, right? In Malaysia, what we experience on and off, sometimes there will be a client that calls us and say, hey, Brian, I would like to transit this many headcounts of contractors or contingent workforce to your payroll starting as fast as tomorrow. Why? Because my current agencies are non-compliant in terms of paying the salary. They have not been paying the salary of our contractors for more than 1 month. This is real life story. As well as from the statutory contribution, we faced before. The client come to us and claim that, hey, you know, our existing vendors are not contributing the necessary statutory to our contractors. So hence now we're asking PERSOLKELLY to step in to help us to transit this candidate over. So hence it's important, I think, to evaluate, to assess the agencies that you will be empaneling, engaging, to ensure that they fulfill your requirement, your expectation before you actually onboard them. Last but not least, I did mention about cash flow. It's also important for you to do an audit as well as evaluate the cash flow status of an workforce agency that you will be engaging, because the model of workforce agency, how we work on contingent workforce model is we will usually fund the contractor's salary upfront first before we invoice you and get the payment from our client. So agencies without a strong cash flow will not be able to support the demand of the request within the contingent workforce that any clients will be requesting from any industry. Yeah. Now, so basically, this is my sharing in summary in the perspective of Malaysia. Like what I've mentioned, I'll be handing it over to our guest panelist who will share more with you from the perspective of Asia Pacific. So thank you very much for listening. I hope this benefits some of you in the room as well. Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Brian. I really learned a lot from that. So moving on. Once again, I'd like to briefly introduce our panelists. So we have Alvin Go joining us from SHRI Singapore, Ethan Lim joining us from Galderma, and Venice Samuel joining us from Netflix. And so we're going to have a few questions that we've already prepared, and then we're going to ask the audience to start submitting questions. And in order to avoid any technical problems or any other disruptions, what we'd like to do is ask you if you have a question that you'd like to ask the panelists, please type it into the Zoom chat box. And then, I can't promise that we'll be able to get to every single one of the questions that people might ask, but we will, take those questions and we'll turn it over and try, time permitting, we'll cover as many questions as we can. But the first question that I'd like to begin with, just to set the tone, I'd love to hear from Alvin, Ethan, and Vinos. What are your thoughts about some of the most significant, contingent workforce challenges that organizations are dealing with right now?
Thanks, Chris. Let me start the conversation. I think one of the major challenges that I see on organizations, employing or deploying the contingent workforce strategy is that they don't have a clear line of sight on the mid to longer term manpower plans that they have. Here in Singapore, a lot of them are using it as a stopgap measure. All right. Take, for example, the F&B industry that we are seeing a crunch in terms of manpower. And a lot of them are just using the contingency workforce as a stopgap measure without thinking about the mid to longer term manpower needs of how their businesses are actually evolving as we move from a pandemic to an endemic situation. All right, borders have already opened up a lot, and we are seeing a lot of buzz in terms of the business community and activities also coming along. And I think this is one of the major areas that organizations who are thinking of adopting a contingent workforce or a strategy or plan along the lines, don't just look at the stopgap measures, right? Look at the longer term needs as well of your manpower needs, be it if you're in the F&B industry or for that matter, in any form of commercial setup. I think this is the first stumbling block that I'm seeing. Readers, what?
Yeah, so sometimes that immediate focus on the short term can hurt you over the longer term, definitely. Ethan, do you have anything to add to that?
Just writing on that, I think it's really a shift of mindset as well. I think a lot of organizations, so my past life is I've been over a decade within the financial services and fintech industry. During hard times, I think where business will not get a permanent headcount and quickly shift into a contingent workforce just to fill some of the key gap positions. I think that's where I align with Alvin itself, but I think it's really changing the mindset and use this as more towards a long-term workforce planning itself, not short-term, but really looking into the capability of the individual, looking into succession planning, ahead of what we need within the organization, what's the mid-term and long-term direction. And it also serves as how do we do in preparation of retention as well.
So I think those are some very important considerations when you are developing up a little bit more of a longer term approach. Not everybody has a lot of experience. So it's good to have somebody who's had a lot of experience with more insight. Vinos.
Yeah, I'll just add that the reason why most organizations don't look longer term is because they don't know what's happening with this particular workforce within their organizations. So for me personally, here at Netflix, as with most organizations, we are finding avenues to optimize cost in this state of economy at this point of time, in order to continue delivering on our growth margins. Right, that's what we are in service of. So one of the levers for this is people cost, and a big component of that is contingent workforce. So that's a realization that has to be across the whole organization, starting from top. There are three broad categories of contingent talent for us within, and Brian, you touched upon this. Temp agency workers, which is the workers that we get from staffing agency partners like PERSOLKELly.
which is a clear employer-employee relationship between the agency and the worker, and then deputed to work for us. There is independent contractors, loosely defined as freelancers, who we procure services from, and they are experts in the services that they provide, and we have a direct agreement with them. And then, of course, there are vendors for outsourced services. Now, the headcount associated with each of these categories for us is managed well centrally to ensure that there's visibility, access, compliance, etc. So no issues there. But the spend for this category is accounted differently for different business units, different countries, etc. And that's where the gap is. So one of our biggest opportunity is to get as much insights as possible from this spend information for all the categories and have this information in front of key decision makers. So that will enable prioritization of some of the key initiatives like integrated workforce planning, like Ethan and Alvin alluded to. But at the same time, also ensuring that when HRBPs and when anybody within leadership is thinking about workforce, contingent is part of that mix for whatever reason, cost savings, or is it for flexibility, whatever, but it's there up for conversation right at the start. The education to the business and our key stakeholders like HRBPs regionally and globally on what's possible with embedding contingent talent into the wider workforce, what are the tangible benefits that we can look at. Flexibility is, of course, big, is key, and a lot of our energy is focused towards that as well, because it's not just us driving things, it has to be coming through from various different stakeholders and departments within. Other than this, I would say talent, for temp workers, we know agencies are quite strong in different markets in Asia, and we can rely on them. But when it comes to independent contractors, a talent pooling for independent contractors, especially for creative services, because I come from that industry, in different parts of APAC is a challenge. We don't have a clear technology or an avenue to access that particular category. Most of it comes through the network that the business has, or the resources that they have worked with in the past, and that's how we get them in. But we need to kind of broaden that. So addressing this, we believe, will open greater flexibility as well, apart from the temp agency workers. So those are few challenges and opportunities for us, per se.
Wow, this panel has amazing insights in this space. So I'm so glad to be part of this conversation. The next question I'd like to put out to you guys is, what's your current approach to contingent workforce utilization, and in which roles do you feel are kind of the best fit for contingent workforces? Can you provide some insight in that regard?
Well, okay, so maybe I'll take a shot at this. When we look at roles and utilization itself, the first thing that comes to mind is that how inclusive is the role that is needed in your organization, or how exclusive it is, right? In certain organizations whereby we are seeing that roles that are a little bit more sensitive, that has got to deal with, as what Vinos was alluding to, things like compliance, legal, intellectual property. I think that's where you really want to think about having the contingent workforce employees to be a bit more inclusive, all right, so as to protect your organization's IP or knowledge or whatever you have. And these roles will be a little bit more on the longer runway, right? Projects that takes about more than half a year to a year, or maybe slightly longer even on that basis itself. Now, on the exclusive part itself, that's where I suppose roles itself will be a bit, or rather the jobs will be a bit more shorter in time frame, all right? Be it like 3 months or less, something around less than 6 months of runway. All right, and I think we have to then really decide and understand the impact of these roles on the organization. Be it what's the ROI is going to be like for us, right? And design the roles itself to make sure that it's delivered, right? And I think then the second phase would then be looking at the line managers to make sure that they understand the roles that these employees on the contingent workforce that are playing, and manage them based on the deliverables and outcomes as agreed. I think this will be the two main areas that I'll be looking at in terms of how I'll be utilizing the contingent workforce itself.
Thank you so much, Alvin. Venus or Ethan, more thoughts on that?
Ethan here. I'm just gonna write on what Alvin mentioned. So apart from that itself, for me myself, or generally, we will also look into the local talent. What are the available contingent workforce, right? What are their capability? So that will allow us to really craft out what, in terms of supply and demand, right? At the end of the day, it's what will be a supply that we have in the local supply, and then from there itself, then we fine tune as well as managing managers' expectation. So what will be the deliverables for the contingent workforce? So from there itself, then we can plan ahead.
For us, when we decide like what roles or what skills should move towards the contingent side, there are a few things that comes into account. Not a checklist, but kind of help us narrow down on the decision. So one is, are these requirements that we're looking to fill in this particular role core to our business, or is it non-core? So if it's non-core, then it's an easier decision for us to make. Are these clear short-term need, or is this need going to continue for a longer term? Because if it's going to continue beyond, let's say, 18 months, 24 months, then probably the best route to go is a full-time route rather than a contingent route. Is it a strategic position versus a non-strategic? Because strategic positions should stay internal rather than looking external. Again, I mean, it also comes into seniority levels, etc., where you can extend your scope when it comes to contingent. Is it location agnostic? By location, I mean geography, but also does that person need to be on site? Can it be done from anywhere else, etc.? So that has a dependency. And then also, what's the extent of access needed, and how much of cross-functional collaboration is needed? Because maybe as a contingent worker, he or she may not be able to do justice to that part because there wouldn't be that infrastructure for onboarding, connections, etc. So all of those are key things. And keeping all of that in mind for us, administrative coordination-oriented roles are a clear go for contingent workforce. Marketing, especially on the operational side, is a go for us, like campaign operations, etc. Finance, accounts payable, etc. for sure. There are some legal roles where we get independent contractors who provide consulting services to come in as well. And tech for sure, because there are so much of tech providers. There's different solutions that we can build there, and also creative services like graphic design, synopsis writers, etc. for our business. So those are some of the skill sets that we get in, which can clearly say contingent workforce could be utilized there.
So those are all really insightful considerations when companies are, when people leaders are thinking about how to best make use of their contingent workforce or how to engage with them. One other question I have for you guys is, how do you see your organization using offshore talent for contingent workforces and even for permanent workforces? Or is it primarily like, local talent, or are you engaging more with offshore? I just love to hear some of your perspectives on that.
Chris, I think the concept of offshoring and nearshoring was at its highest point, at least here in Singapore, perhaps maybe 3 months to 6 months into the circuit breaker in 2020 here in Singapore. We were hearing a lot of organizations were offshoring and nearshoring their work to countries like in the Philippines, to India, to some of the developing nations here in Singapore as well. I think it's a good step to complement the manpower needs when we look at offshoring. But what we also saw that communication in terms of clarity or rather the setting of expectations right, the deliverables itself was somewhat of a challenge at the early start when organizations were offshoring their roles. Of course, when we talk about offshoring and overlay with the fact about compensation and stuff like that, the taxations came into the picture as well. And a lot of organizations and HR business partners struggle with all these taxations, with transferring of funds and so forth. But what was also interesting that from a conversation that I had with some of the tech startup founders themselves, at that point of time in 2020 itself, some of the more tech-savvy guys were paying in cryptocurrencies. So that was actually very interesting when I saw it. But of course, it's a different picture today in the cryptocurrency world today. All right, but that was something that I said, hey, that's actually a very interesting way of rewarding your employees. All right, at that point in time, you're offshoring and nearshoring.
Yeah.
Just as long as you're not paid in a cryptocurrency that winds up losing much of its value before you can cash it out.
Yeah.
So, Vinos or Ethan, more to add about the perspective on offshoring?
I'll just add that, of course, offshoring is always a topic that organizations keep debating about, but it has a lot of things to fall into place, like how Alvin alluded to in terms of taxation. Do you have an entity, etc.? I do see a lot of these employer of record services companies coming up, having a lot of presence across different countries. And now, since more and more role can be geography agnostic, I see a trend where organizations are open to hiring full-time or contingent workers anywhere from where the services could be provided, and using those employer of record services companies to kind of help onboard them, payroll them, etc. So it is a trend. But for me, I mean, from perspective of Netflix, I see there's value for offshoring, and especially when you have an internal contingent workforce program that can provide a lot of visibility of what kind of skills are we hiring for contingent, and also for a company to directly move towards offshoring may be a very difficult move. But once you have a workforce for contingent, and okay, these roles are working really well, or workflows are really working well with contingent workers for these particular roles. And once you have a scale, let's say 10 employees or 10 workers or 20 workers doing that particular job, offshoring that part becomes easier. And that becomes an easy sell to the business as well. And I think there's a value there. So not directly moving from, let's say, all full-time employees to offshore somewhere, but building a contingent workforce program, providing as much insights, building a business case, and then moving to offshore.
Okay. And Ethan?
I think Alvin and Vinos has really covered this topic very well. So
Understood. So remarkable insights. I now like to turn it over to the audience. So if you have questions that you would like to ask, and already I see we have a number of questions in the chat box. So let me just take a look at a few of these. If you have more questions, feel free to type it in the chat box. And then, unfortunately, we won't have enough time to cover all the questions, but we'll try to get to the ones that we can. So one question that came up was, and I'll just put it out there to anybody that can answer. Your experience with foreigner hiring and hosting employment paths in certain roles, is this something that that I guess that sort of touches on the offshoring that we were just talking about a minute ago, but if you have more to say about that, any perspective from the panelists?
I mean, if you're offshoring your job to a foreign talent that is based outside of Singapore, I don't think there's a need for employment pass. All right. I mean, from a past perspective, I don't think it's necessary. And based on what I'm aware of, is like most of the time the relationship can actually be offshore as well to a holding company you have, and the holding company can be the paymaster or contractual obligations between employer and employee itself. So work passes don't really apply in this instance here.
Okay.
I think this question is more towards if PERSOLKELly provides such services where they host employment passes within their structure, I guess.
Thanks, Vinos. So the answer is like, for instance, in Malaysia, yes, we do host EP or in fact host the EP workforce under this managed services category, where this group of individuals are being measured based on deliverables, like what the panelist has mentioned. But again, like what the panelist has highlighted as well, nowadays it's also an option for companies to consider whether to offshore the role, depending on the role type, depending on the coverage of the role. I think remote hiring is also one of the options made available to all the companies, that not necessarily you must deploy or onboard that employee into your hosting company or hosting country, sorry. Yeah.
Okay. So thank you so much for answering that, Brian. A question arose, and I'll just put it out to the panelists. What are some considerations an organization should incorporate when developing their workforce plan?
I mean, I would touch back on the framework that I wrote about. So thinking a little more deeply into the kind of roles that you want to hire. Are they long-term, short-term? Are they strategic, non-strategic? Can you, I mean, do you want them to collaborate widely, not collaborate widely, etc.? So those are some of the key questions, and that can differ from company to company, location to location as well. So that's something for you to keep in mind when you're working through your workforce plan. So if you have 100 workers that you need to hire next year, then you can get into what those 100 workers are, and if among them, if there are any skill sets which can move towards contingent workers, and then you can build from there. How do you hire them? Who do you engage, and so on and so forth.
Another question I'll put out there. What are some new HR trends or new roles that companies should be considering as they do planning over the next 2 to 3 years? Any new roles that you guys are seeing?
You know, one of the new roles that, or rather I came across a business card when I was attending a networking session. And this person that I met, the job title was HR Ethics Manager.
Wow.
Yeah. So, you know, and I was very curious, and I started to ask a little bit. And I think that's something, you know, that it goes, if we think about ethics and everything itself, it goes beyond the PDPA concept. All right. And then when I was asking the role itself, what was the person looking and doing? And it was basically about humanizing their workplaces and making sure that everything was beyond above board, right? Beyond the compliance, beyond the legal, and making sure that you know, employees have access to you know, the platforms, you know, making sure that everybody had a form of development, right? Mind, body, and soul. And I thought that was something so creative of the organization. All right. And in some of the tech companies that I met as well, you know, they don't call themselves CHROs, they call themselves Chief People Innovators. All right. And I thought that's something a very different, it brings together a very refreshing perspective if we think about it, right? Chief People Innovator. What does that even mean, right? And if we think about it deeper itself, it's really about going deeper and getting that engagement beyond, you know, the dollars and cents, right? And I think that's something I'm seeing, and I hope that you really unfold in the next 3 years on that. So other than that, you know, I wish I got a crystal ball to tell the panelists and also to tell the audience here what's going to happen, but unfortunately I don't have a crystal ball. You know, maybe Venus or whatever.
No crystal ball with me as well. But Adam Grant says that beautifully to what you were mentioning, Alvin. like employees are not resources to be managed, but they are humans to be leveraged and valued and helped motivate. So that's a completely different shift from how HR has operated before, and all of these new changes that you see in tech companies comes from that perspective of valuing humans. And the last 2 years that we've gone through with COVID has put that in the front. That's the only way to keep employees motivated, happy, and engaged, rather than treating them like resources.
But riding on to that, I think I think the key thing is really what is the company direction. Where are they heading? That's really determine going forward what are the key positions, and then being a bit more open towards what are the more flexible role. Then go back to the whole what Vinos has shared, right? How do you determine the role itself? Should it be a permanent role, or should it be a contingent workforce? Then applying that into the workforce planning, I think that will be that should be the way.
So I think we could keep taking questions, and this panel especially, there's so much insight. I'd love to learn more from all of you. Unfortunately, in the interest of time, we're going to go ahead and bring the Q&A session to an end now. And so, thank you so much for sharing this insight. It's been, incredibly informative and educational, really helping me to think, and I hope helping all of our audience to think about how they can do better contingent workforce planning, or make better utilization of contingent workforce. Just going on. So I just want to introduce, so PERSOLKELLY is a human resources regional talent solutions provider. We help our clients overcome many of their HR challenges. We offer, let me just keep on going here. I'm going to play this. So a couple of the key solutions that we provide to help our clients. So we offer borderless recruitment. We order flexible workforce solutions. We are a global professional employer organization, and we also provide HR advisory, and we provide solutions across 13 markets in APAC, and we'd love to speak with you if we can be helpful to you. So thank you so much for joining us today. It was truly a pleasure to host our amazing panelists and to hear insight from Brian. We really appreciate everybody in the audience for joining us. We apologize if we were not able to get to your question. Unfortunately, there's never enough time to address all of the questions that arise in these kind of panels. But we do take your feedback very seriously, and we always strive to improve. So if you could do us a favor and take a moment to scan this QR code and give us just a little bit of feedback on today's session. Let us know what we did well, and let us know what we need to do to improve to make our next session even better. I think, as long as we can continue to have amazing panelists like this, it's always a pleasure to help to organize these kind of events.